Thank you, thank you, thank you. So appreciate that. Thank you. I wonder why it is that I get the feeling I'm around my kind of people. You know, it's funny because I was watching, some of you might have watched on your way in, that the president, even now, I think is finishing his State of the Union address. And he got a warm welcome also. So thank you, truly thank you. And thank you, Alicia, thank you, Sienna, thank you to all of you for being here. I'm really honored. And I know that you know that we're living at a very important moment in our history. And as Martin Luther King said, your life begins to end on the day you stop talking about things that matter. And that's what I think politics should be. You know, Mahatma Gandhi said that politics should be sacred. And he didn't mean religious. He wasn't talking about religious doctrine or dogma. He was talking about a place within us where we think very deeply. And one of the things that I have come to believe, having run for president now twice, but also from the 40 years of my career before this as well, the American people are not the problem. We have the capacity to, certainly it's not just that we have the capacity, we are as decent as any people, we are as intelligent, and when called to it, we are as noble. But although I do see great decency in the American people, and it gives me great faith in what we are capable of and what we are willing to do, I also have seen up close the gap that exists between this realm of possibility that emerges from the depth of who we are, our ability to think for ourselves, our ability to talk among ourselves, and to come up with solutions. That's a universe of experience away from the political machinery that dominates this country. It's like they are two completely separate realms of existence. And that's not good news for our country, because in a representative democracy, the whole idea, of course, is that who we are and what we think would be expressed through our representatives, so that whatever was true about us is what would be reflected by the political system. I don't think anybody believes that that's true right now. And I, being in the belly of this beast, can totally affirm to you that it is not true. And I think that that itself is a crisis. The problem is not that we don't have solutions to our problems in this country. I think we do. I don't think that there's any problem that confronts us that there's not somebody, a lot of people around this country who already have the best practices, who already know what to do, whether it has to do with healing, whether it has to do with energy, whether it has to do with agriculture, whether it has to do with repairing people's lives, whether it has to do with criminal justice. We have people in this country who are already demonstrating, not just articulating, but already demonstrating best practices, the kinds of things that would actually put this country back on track. The problem is the people who have the solutions don't have the power. And the people who have the power too often don't really want to hear the actual solutions, because the actual solutions would actually undercut the bottom line, profit maximization of the corporate and billionaire donors who are actually keeping the people with power where they are. And so what's happening is you'll have somebody with a solution working hard for a $25,000 or $50,000 or $100,000 fundraiser, while the people who are elected representatives are giving multi-millions, if not billions, to the very entities that are causing the problems that the problem solvers are trying to solve. You and I better step in or this shit's not going to stop.
That's right.
And that is really what my message is. That is why I am here. And I ask that you join with me in remembering that the status quo, it is our power. You know, I think sometimes people feel very powerless, but we are only powerless until we pierce the illusion and realize we are as powerful as we make ourselves. Now, when I mentioned before that I have faith in the American people, and I think that we have the same decency, the same intelligence as the people anywhere else. I'm not saying we're better than others, but we're people, right? But this I do think is true of the American people. You could take any two of us, two people in this room who don't even know each other, and you could go out for drinks later tonight. Within 30 minutes, you'd both know which one of you, if both of you or not, were in therapy. You both know probably who was traumatized by what. You know if you were in any toxic relationship and any boundaries you had to set. I mean, everybody, we get it. Everybody does deep mining these days of what's going on in our own lives. But when it comes to our collective mind, when it comes to what happens when we get together in rooms like this for political consideration, we've all been trained to dumb it down. We've all been trained to think like sixth graders. We've all been trained to farm out our best thinking. And by farming out our best thinking to people who we were led to believe were the experts, who had our well-being in mind, we have surrendered. Talk about lack of self-care. Talk about self-betrayal. We talk about needing to set boundaries with people with whom you have an abusive relationship. I think we need to set a boundary with people who are allowing carcinogens in your food, for people who are withholding health care from you when everybody in every advanced democracy has it. People who are responsible for the fact that 39% of Americans report regularly skipping meals in order to pay their rent, when over half of our bankruptcies are due to medical bankruptcies, when 1 in 4 Americans have medical debt, when 18 million Americans cannot afford to pay for the prescriptions that their doctors give them, when 68,000 Americans are dying every year from lack of health care, when the majority of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, and the majority of Americans cannot afford to absorb an unexpected $400 expenditure. What are we talking about here? And the president, with all due respect to him as a person, is saying that things are great. That's his message tonight. And worse than the fact that it sounds so absurd, that's not going to beat Donald Trump. It's not going to beat Donald Trump. And I'll tell you why. Franklin Roosevelt said we would not have to worry about a takeover by fascism. He said we would not have to worry about a fascist takeover in this country as long as democracy delivered on its promises. If democracy were delivering on its promises, we would have universal health care, Medicare for all, with eyeglasses, with dental, with hearing aids, and with mental health, as in every other advanced democracy. If democracy were delivering on its promises, we would have tuition-free college and tech school, as in every other advanced democracy. If democracy were delivering on its promises, these heinous college loan debts, which didn't even exist until the 1970s, would not be burdening young people. And for those of you in the audience who are older like me, I'd like you to do a little exercise with me. Think of who you were when you were in your 20s. Could you have handled tens of thousands of dollars worth of debt? Would you be here today? And then we're wondering where this mental health crisis comes from. 70% of Americans say they live with chronic economic anxiety. And you think we're going to beat Donald Trump by saying everything's just groovy? I'll tell you who it's groovy for. It's groovy for the people who are writing speeches like that, because they are going to high-end eateries in Washington or Los Angeles or New York, maybe Sun Valley. And to them, the cost of that Sunday brunch is not that big a deal. That is not the experience of the majority of Americans. Now, for those of you who are young, I'm going to describe a land to you that's going to seem like very long ago and far away. It's going to sound to you, going to feel to you like I must be talking about a fairy tale. But the people who are older in this room are going to nod their heads, and they're going to confirm that I'm not lying to you. And you know I'm not lying to you because you probably know it intellectually, but we really need to take this in. So I'm going to describe to you this land long ago and far away. It was called the 1970s. And I want to describe this land to you, if I might. The average American couple could afford a house. The average American couple could afford a car. The average American couple could afford a yearly vacation. The average American couple could afford for one parent to stay home with the kids if they wanted to. One salary could support a family of 4. And that average American couple could send their kids, that's plural, to college. That was the 1970s. And since then, there has been a $50 trillion transfer of wealth from the bottom 90% of the American people to the top 1%. And for those of us who remember, we remember how it happened. We remember when it happened. We were sold this bill of goods that was like this wool pulled over people's eyes, trickle-down economics. And people were told that this was really a good thing. And there was this very charming man who really sold us on this. His name was Ronald Reagan, kids. And he said that this would be a great thing because if we made it so that more and more money went into the hands of the stockholders, even though that was at the expense of other stakeholders, like the workers, like the community, like the environment, like safety, it would be good, see? Because these stockholders would grow so rich, they'd become job creators. And then they'd be like these masters on Mount Olympus, and they would drop crumbs from their perch up there in the forms of job creation, and then it would lift all boats. And it didn't happen that way. It threw millions of people off the boats they were already in. It left millions of people without even a life vest, because the business model of these people was never job creation. It was job elimination. It was demonizing unions. It was squeezing every last dollar, squeezing every last opportunity possible out of communities, out of families, out of individuals, so that this one class of people could grow richer and richer. Now listen, let's be very clear here. This is not personal. You know, we must go about all of this very non-violently. This is not demonizing individuals. Not every rich person in America is a greedy bastard. Not every poor person is holy and pure. We have to have this conversation, but don't personalize it. We have to see it as systems. Right. And that's how we have to see it, and that's how we have to even think about it in our own hearts, right? Okay. How did this happen? All right, now it's interesting. Because in our collective experience, in our national life, no differently than in our individual lives, you gain a lot of insight about who you are and where you are in your life by looking at where you came from. So just like when you go to therapy and you start hearing and thinking and analyzing your parents, your grandparents, where your people came from, etc. So I'd like you to go back with me now, even further than the 1970s, okay? I want you to go back with me to 1776. In 1776, some very brave men, 56 of them to be exact, signed the Declaration of Independence. And the Declaration of Independence is our mission statement. The Declaration of Independence is our North Star. It is our vision statement. It is what Abraham Lincoln referred to as an eternal rebuke against all forms of tyranny and oppression. You know, in the Jewish religion, it says that every generation must rediscover God for itself. And every generation of Americans has to rediscover the meaning of that document for ourselves. We've lost our emotional and psychological connection to the principles on which we stand, principles which not only give us power, but give us profound responsibility. And if those principles are merely, you know, inscribed on marble walls somewhere, or if they are written in parchment under glass in Washington somewhere, but no longer connected to us on a personal level, they lose their moral force. And when that happens, we become easy to play. And that's exactly what has happened. We have been played. All right, so let's go back to 1776. So in 1776, 56 men signed this document, and they were very brave men. And the reason I say that they were brave is because if the British had won the war, those men would have been executed as traitors. And by so signing, they infused into the founding of a nation principles of possibility, human possibility. This is not just about politics. This is about the moral and spiritual evolution of the human race. Possibilities were created, after which the world would never be the same. And with these principles, they repudiated centuries and longer of social and political and economic systems that had dominated the world and kept the vast majority of the world on some level kept down. Now, these principles were profoundly enlightened, and it behooves us to remember what they are. Number one, all men are created equal. When I was a kid, I remember we were told about the Sun King and the divine right of kings? The divine right of kings. I remember that from what was it, elementary school or middle school? That God had given power to the king. So God had given power to the king, the queen, their cronies, the aristocracy. That's what power, it was a divine right of kings. Here it was going to be completely different. That God had created everyone equal, which clearly we're still going through today, no differently, whether it's trans people, whether it's women's rights. This is generation after generation, but we'll get there. All men are created equal. Secondly, given by their creator, inalienable rights, can't take it away, of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So what would that be in today's language? You have the right to self-actualize. You have the right to do what you want to do, be who you want to be, whatever makes you happy. Spread your wings, fly high, make it happen. As long as you don't hurt anyone else, you have the right to be that and do that. Shocking. I mean, this is it never happened in the world that it was declared, go for it, do it. You have that right as long as you don't hurt anyone else. Then it gets even more radical because it says governments are instituted to secure those rights. Not thwart them, not diminish them, not take them away, to secure them. And then the most radical thing of all, if the government is not doing that job, it is the right of the people to alter it or to abolish it. It's like we're one big, I forgot, right? Okay, so that's where it started. And that was indeed a burst of enlightenment. But it's also, as we know, where things got very gnarly. Because 41 of those 56 men were slave owners. Now, that fact is the American story. That is who we are. That is in our characterological DNA. We are, and we have always been, both and. We have always been from the beginning. It's there in our national DNA. The best the humanity has had to offer, and some of the worst that humanity has to offer. Because what happens here is that there are people who's in every generation, because every generation lives this out. Every single generation, even unto ours, is another iteration of the same story. Both people who get how big this is. People who get, man, this is as big as it gets in terms of earthly manifestation. And people who have shown generation after generation, even unto today, that they are willing to struggle for those principles and sacrifice for those principles and even die for those principles. But there have also been, from the very beginning, in every generation, and yes, even unto ours, people who for their own ideological and or financial purposes put their property rights before your rights to anything, who for their own ideological and or financial purposes have no intention whatsoever of seeing all those principles actualized, and have proven in the most violent ways that they will do whatever it takes to make sure that it does not happen.
They will do that.
Now, every generation plays this out, some more dramatically than others. And it serves us to look how this has played out in terms of the larger arc of American history. Because when you look at the larger arc of American history, you're very impressed. by former generations. We had slavery in this country. What else did we have? We had abolition and the Civil War. Yes, we had the institutionalized suppression of women in this country. We also had the women's suffragist movement and the passage of the 19th Amendment. We had the Gilded Age and the financial economic inequities that it embodied. And then we also had the establishment of the labor movement. And we had the systematic oppression of Black people, segregation in the American South, and then we had civil rights movement. Those were our ancestors, generations that stood up and they pushed back, as Lincoln said, they rebuked and they rejected systems of inherent systematic injustice. I'm running for president because it's our turn now. Now, with us, it's not a specific institutional reality. It's a little more complicated. When it's a specific institutional reality, it's like a tumor that needs to be excised. This is more like a cancer that is metastasized. With us, it's not a specific institution, it is an economic paradigm. And this economic paradigm has now replaced democracy as our governing principle. It is the very idea that instead of your safety, health, and well-being, i.e. your rights to inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that somehow that's not government's bottom line. Somehow that's not, for all practical purposes, government's responsibility to secure, so much as our elected representatives are actually more beholden to their donors who represent the very economic forces that would block your safety, health, and well-being whenever it did not serve their bottom line. Exactly. Right. So what we have now is, as Lincoln said, when the Battle of Gettysburg was won by the North, that was the battle that meant we got this. The Union would be saved, the North won. So he actually went to the battlefield. He wrote the Gettysburg Address, and in that, he described the men who had died for the North. He said that they had given their last full measure of devotion so that a government of the people, by the people, and for the people would not perish from the earth. The reason we're here tonight is because it's perishing now. It's perishing on our watch. We have become a government of the corporations and by the corporations and for the corporations. And that economic paradigm, now emboldened by the Supreme Court, the John Roberts Supreme Court, with that Citizens United decision, giving unlimited power to corporate money to influence our elections, has now turned Washington into a system of legalized bribery. And this is now the new status quo. And that status quo is such that in issue after issue, our elected representatives do more to serve that economic bottom line of their donors than to serve the safety, health, and well-being, even the expressed will of their constituencies, right, to the point where, at this point, the status quo itself is such that government is only a system of legalized bribery. That is our new status quo. The word inertia means the tendency of the object to move in whatever direction it's been moving. That's the direction it's moving. That is the new status quo. The status quo will not disrupt itself. If that's going to happen, it's because we do it. They won't. Right. That's it. Yeah. And was always thus. The abolitionist movement, the women's suffrage movement, the labor movement, the civil rights movement, these did not originate in the political parties. The political parties were forced to go there. But now we have surrendered to political parties. And I'm sorry to say, as a lifelong Democrat, the Democrats, at this point, it's so different than when I was growing up. It used to be that they used to say that the Republicans fall in line and the Democrats fall in love. Everything's changed now. The Republicans fall in love and the Democrats fall in line. Whatever the DNC says. Like there's some brilliant, these geniuses who gave us Trump the first time.
Yeah, exactly.
These geniuses who did it before in 2016, and we're letting them do it again. They're choosing. They're choosing. That's why they put their fingers on the scale in 2016. I actually think if they had just kept their fingers off the scales, which, by the way, is the traditional role of the political party. Let's go back a little further. In George Washington's farewell address, he said that his biggest fear for America was political parties. He said that he feared that they would form factions of men who were more concerned with their party than with their country. And John Adams would then say he saw them as the biggest threat to democracy. Political parties are not mentioned in the Constitution. And political parties, traditionally, like when I was growing up, when I was a young woman, they would stand in the background. And then when it came to nominating candidates, the people decided. The people decided. And then at that point, the political party would come forward. Well, in 2016, the party decided to put its fingers on the scale for Hillary as opposed to Bernie. Now, this is my personal opinion. I think if they just kept their fingers off the scale, I don't actually know who would have won, Bernie or Hillary, but I think we would have all felt good about it. And I don't think Trump would have ever been president. Well, after that election, some ex-Bernie supporters took the DNC to court. And they took them to court for the fact that they had not been fair. Does anybody know how the DNC defended themselves in court?
They said that, like in a smoke-filled back room, they can make whatever decisions.
That's exactly what they said. They said, hey, we're a private corporation. We don't owe it to people to be fair.
Wow.
And they won the case. So now we're all going, whoa, because to us, or at least to most of us, and to all of you who have your mouths open, they are performing a quasi-governmental function. So we're all thinking, well, of course they owe it to us to be fair. But they got away with it. They won the court case saying that. Wow. And so then in 2020, they were even more brazen. And this year, they didn't even pretend. Right. From the very beginning, no, we're here to help the president be renominated. That will not be in the hands of the people. We've gone back to Tammany Hall politics, a bunch of men sitting around a circle, a circular table, smoking their cigars like 100 years ago, and deciding it would be Joe. Now, I personally believe candidate suppression is a form of voter suppression.
Yes.
But what we have in this country is it's a political media industrial complex because they use the media. That's why this time you didn't see me on CNN this year, did you? You didn't see me on MSNBC this year. So last time I had a CNN town hall. Last time they were satisfied to just make me into ridiculous. She's crazy. She's a crazy lady. She's a crystal lady. She's woo-woo, right? This year they saw me coming. It's like, no, we're not amused. So completely blacklisted on CNN, completely blacklisted on MSNBC. How can you possibly be a Democratic candidate for president with any chance whatsoever if no one sees you on CNN or no one sees you on MSNBC? Complete invisibilization, complete erasure. And then once Dean Phillips got in, they actually threw us off ballots.
Yeah.
Florida, Tennessee, North Carolina, Wisconsin. Dean was able to get Wisconsin back because the secretaries of state would say to the Democratic Party, okay, we're going to print the ballots. Who do you want? And the Democratic Party went, Joe Biden. And the Secretary of State said, oh, okay. And then we would say, no, we're an FEC registered candidate for president. And they say, hey, ask the party. The party says who they want. And the one state where the Secretary of State overrode that when the party tried to do it was the Secretary of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. But I'm just saying, this is how this country is functioning. And I used to think that it was the political parties who were sort of chopping wood and carrying water, for these huge corporate forces. Now I realize that they are. one of those corporations.
Right.
And so is CNN, and so is MSNBC, and so is the mainstream media. So at this point, we have a problem on our hands, and we need to deal with it.
Yeah, we do.
Okay. Now, what is this? Who are they? Well, it's not a covert. It's nothing covert here. It's very overt. We all know who they are. I'm not telling you anything tonight that you don't already know. I mean, I might name a few statistics or something, but I don't think any of this is like something we don't already know. It's just that our minds are scrambled sometimes. So it's a matrix of corporate power. Insurance companies, whose institutionalized greed is why you don't have universal health care, why you have 75 to 90 million people who are underinsured and uninsured in this country. For a lot of people in America, their insurance will cover the trip to the doctor. It just won't cover the test the doctor wants to give you. It won't cover the operation the doctor thinks you need. It won't cover for 18 million the pills that the doctors prescribe. Well, once again, you don't have this in any other advanced democracy or any other advanced nation. And it's pharmaceutical companies, the institutionalized greed of pharmaceutical companies. We have 1.3 million people who ration their insulin. My mother died of diabetes, my grandmother died of diabetes, my uncle died of diabetes, my niece died of an insulin overdose. I've been around it enough to know that is terrifying for someone. That would be terrifying for someone who can't afford their insulin. There are people in this country deciding between the insulin and the rent. I heard one woman say to me, if I had to choose my rent or my insulin, and I knew if I bought my insulin, then I'd have to live in the car with my kids, but I thought at least I'd have a mother. This is, if not the richest country in the world, one of the richest countries in the world. This is no other reason than the greed of the pharmaceutical companies. We have carcinogens in our food that you don't have in other countries. I'm sure you probably saw that viral piece about the ketchup bottle here versus the ketchup bottle in Canada. Because of big food companies. They find that there's an ingredient that you can put in the food and it gives it a longer shelf life, which gives it higher stockholder value. So it's carcinogenic. So in other countries, they say you can't use it. Here, hey, deregulate, deregulate, deregulate. It's big chemical companies, which is why we have chemicals in our pesticides that we know harm a child's brain. Big agriculture companies and what it's done to the earth, what it's done to the food, what it's done to the farmers. It's gun manufacturers whose bottom line profit maximization is why guns flood our streets the way they do. It's big oil companies, and with big oil as well as the defense industry, I don't care whether the president is Democrat or Republican these days, they fall in line. Even now, and so what's happened is one major party says climate change is a hoax, and the other major party, I'm sorry to say, has become really good at telling you what you want to hear. Really good at telling you what they know you want. So we'll say something like, we're the climate president because of some very good, actually, very healthy investments in green energy in the Inflation Reduction Act. The problem is it's like a classic purse thief distraction technique. At the same time, the president has given more oil drilling permits than even Donald Trump did. So at the same time that we're investing in green, we're investing even more in dirty, plus such things as the Willow Project. And then I don't need to tell anyone here what is going on with the defense industry and the fact that so much of our military adventures have been military misadventures that have more to do with profit motivation of Raytheon and Northrop Grumman and Boeing than it had to do with righteous foreign policy. And it's a matrix of corporate power. And the only thing that can override it at this point is a massive march on the ballot box. That is the only thing that could change it at this point. A nonviolent, peaceful, political revolution that has to include the electoral. It has to include other things as well, such as the amazing regeneration going on with labor right now. Obviously, it has to be inside, outside, but you can't leave out the electoral, and you cannot leave out the president, because the president has levers of power, and that's really where the rubber meets the road. It's the actual power to appoint the people who run these agencies, to make sure that the corporate forces that have captured these agencies are run out. And the president has the power, not only the moral vision, you know, Franklin Roosevelt said that the greatest power of the presidency is moral leadership. Somebody who actually has a vision of what should be. You know, I know that, you know, the way the system talks about someone like myself, oh, she's not qualified. She's not qualified. Well, their idea of qualified is qualified to perpetuate the system as it is. Their idea of qualified is someone who's already in the club, already knows how to drive the car, that drove us into this ditch, and so those are the people who would know to lead us out. But the problem is not that we need another political car mechanic in Washington. The problem is that we're on the wrong road. We don't need another technocrat. We need a visionary. I'm not the greatest visionary in the United States, but I am the only one running for the Democratic nomination. I also like to point out what the founders called qualified to be president. Because the founders said, you have to be born here, you have to be 35 years old or older, and you have to have lived here for 14 years. It's very interesting there, and in a lot of places in the Constitution, what it doesn't say. It does not say you had to have been a governor, or a senator, or a congressperson. It actually leaves it to every generation to determine for itself. What do you think is the skill set that is most necessary in order to lead the country through the challenges at a particular time? I submit to you that somebody who's been involved with that system too long, it almost should be a disqualifier. It almost should be a disqualifier. And I'd like to submit to you that my qualifications, probably more than anything else, is that I have been up close and personal with the real serious suffering of people in the United States. And what I've seen in this country over the last 40 plus years is very interesting. My career began with the AIDS crisis, because I was starting to, give metaphysical, spiritual talks, etc. when the AIDS crisis happened. And from that, from my experience up close and personal with people going through, life does not get harder or more of a crisis than that. I then began to have that kind of a career for years in people's lives. I heard somebody once say, nobody calls Marianne because things are going well. So I was the one that often got the call when the test results came back, and it's cancer, the test results came back, it's AIDS, and your child, is on heroin, you're going to have to go bankrupt, someone you love has died, or whatever. And that has been a real privilege in my life, and a real blessing, and I feel that it's showed me a lot about people, and it showed me a lot about what it takes to endure a crisis and to transform a crisis. But when my career began in the 1980s, in most of the people that I knew, as well as in America, a time of crisis was the exception. It wasn't the rule. And I began to notice something change around the late 1990s, year 2000, early 2000s. Of course, you do the math. Hello, that's the flowering of the Reagan Revolution, right? And I began to meet more and more people whose lives were in a kind of permanent state of crisis. The crisis was the rule and not the exception. The problem wasn't just that you had an illness. The problem was you had no health care. The problem was that you had to work 2-3 jobs in order to survive. I saw what this would do with families. I saw what this would do to marriages. I saw what this would do to communities. And I realized how much of the crisis that I began to see was not due to the proverbial acts of God where these things just happen. They were due to bad public policy. They were due to public policies that were the new normal, that had to do with the fact that people could barely make it. That people were struggling in a way that, like I said, in the 1970s, it just wasn't that way. I would meet people for whom in life there was no wiggle room. Now, some of you old enough to remember when being on the Oprah show meant you were home free for a while. And I was very fortunate, and Oprah really opened the world of possibility for me. So I've seen how America works. If you're in the club, this is a really fine country. I'm not saying it's not a fine country everywhere, but I mean economically. If you're in that top 20% of earners, the economy is working, and that is to be celebrated. We don't want to denigrate that. But the 20% of Americans for whom the economy is working well, it's like we're living on a vast sea of enchantment, and we're surrounded by a vast sea of economic despair. And when I have to tell you, when I heard the president talking tonight on my way here about how things are going well, this is 2016 all over again. Because there were two people who said to the American people in 2016, your rage is legitimate. Your pain is valid. You're right, the system is rigged against you. It was Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders. And the difference was that Donald Trump, well, let's say the difference is that Bernie Sanders meant it.
Right.
So we didn't do well with a candidate who said, let's just continue the success of the last 8 years. People were like, what success? I'm drowning here. And now we're going to go back against him again, and man, he has perfected his game. And we're going to say, just things are going well. Things are going well. How can you say things are going well to people who are hungry? 39% of Americans, 39% of Americans, as I said before, report regularly skipping meals in order to pay their rent. All right, well, that's a bad. The point is, what are we going to do about it? And there's plenty we can do. But we need fundamental economic reform. So Franklin Roosevelt, his wife, said to him, we need more than the amelioration of stress. President Biden represents the corporatist democratic perspective, which is, we do want to make it easier for you. We would like to ameliorate your stress, but we will only go up to the line past which, if we were to help you anymore, it would undercut the bottom line of our donors, so we won't go there. Okay? So we need an economic bill of rights. That's what Franklin Roosevelt said. An economic bill of rights, which means Medicare for all, improved Medicare for all, complete elimination of the college loan debt, let these people back in the game. That's all I want to be. Complete guaranteed sick pay, guaranteed affordable housing, and guaranteed living wage. Now, all those things that I just mentioned, with the paid family leave, with all of those things that I just mentioned, they are considered moderate positions in every other advanced democracy. When somebody says, oh, you're far left or something, actually, that's moderate. The Overton window has moved so far to the right. That's just the kind of stuff that you should expect from your tax dollars. By the way, when people say it's free, no, it's your money. It's your money, right? In addition to that, we need to, and even Donald Rumsfeld said, he said we need to learn to wage peace. We need a peace academy. We need a Department of Peace. We need a peace academy just like we have a military academy. We need to be playing peace games, not just war games. We need armies of peace builders, not just armies of military personnel. We need to become as sophisticated in waging peace as some people are sophisticated in waging war. John F. Kennedy said that if we don't get rid of war, war will get rid of us. And a lot of people don't understand, I think, that peace building is a real thing. It's an actual set of talent and skill. And there are 4 factors which, when present, indicate statistically that there will be a higher incidence of peace and a lower incidence of violence. And these will not surprise anyone. Number 1, greater economic opportunities for women. Number 2, greater educational opportunities for children. Number 3, a reduction of violence against women. And number 4, the amelioration of unnecessary human despair. That's what we should be doing with our tax dollars. Waging peace. We obviously need a mass mobilization immediately for a just transition from a dirty economy to a clean economy. We need to move from a war economy to a peace economy, which, by the way, there's more return on investment, even economically, with a peace economy, as in putting your money into health, putting your money into education, than putting your money into the war machine, the forever war machine that dominates Washington. And I live there. I'm going to tell you something about living in Washington. And they're nice people. They're nice people everywhere. This is, once again, none of this is about nice versus not nice people. But I'd always heard that Washington, D.C. now, of course, is a bubble. It's more than a bubble. It's like a walled city. People get into that system, and it's like they're emotionally buffered from something. It's astonishing. You know, it's interesting because what the founders wanted to do when they made the capital Washington, D.C., what they wanted to do based on their experience and of the past in Europe, they wanted the government to be out of your face. So they didn't want it to be right there. So they had good intentions of making it somewhere else, okay? But if you go to the great capitals, let's say of Europe, if you go to Paris, if you go to Berlin, if you go to London, the capital of the government is also the capital of the arts, the capital of the culture. It's where the thinking people are. Now, we've got this huge country, but my point is, in all those countries, the people who are making the laws are kind of with hip and happening what's going on in the culture. What's happening in DC is they're this separate thing. I swear, people, they need to leave town. They need to get out, they need to see, and I know they go back to their districts, but when they go back to their districts, they're still in their districts as part of the machine. Okay? So we need to deal with the fact that Washington is dominated by this forever war machine, the blob, as it is called in Washington. We need, obviously, to be ramping down, not ramping up fossil fuel extraction. And we need to declare a climate emergency if that's what it takes to do so. I think we also need a Department of Children and Youth. We have children in this country who are traumatized before preschool. I have met elementary school principals who tell me that they have children in their elementary school on suicide watch. In public schools around this country, there are trauma rooms. This is one of the reasons we're bleeding teachers. Teachers are having to deal with behavioral problems. They're having to deal with traumatized children, not to even mention the fact that they're worried in certain situations for their lives. They're saying, this is not what I signed up for.
Right.
You know, a lot of people, if you would ask a lot of people, what do you think is the biggest collateral damage of a kind of malevolent strain of capitalism? Remember, this is not an anti-capitalist message. Adam Smith, who was the primary architect of free market capitalism, said it cannot exist outside an ethical context. Nothing can work well outside of an ethical context. An economic system is here to serve us. We're not here to serve an economic system. And yes, that's what's happening today. So many people, if you ask them what's the greatest collateral damage to the way the economy operates today, they would say the earth itself. Well, the earth itself is certainly collateral damage, but I think more than that is America's children. These children are not old enough to vote, so they're not a constituency. They're not old enough to work, so they have no financial leverage. And if you step back and look at the risk factors of America's children, it is heinous. It is immoral. It is collective neglect. If we want this country to be everything that we would all envision and wish for in 20 years from now, we need a massive transfer of resources into the lives of children under 10 today. And particularly early childhood. We know things about early childhood that they didn't even know 15 years ago. And they know about like 90% of the brain is developed in the first 5 years of life. So the old conversation of what are we going to do about education, that's almost quaint. We have to talk about what are we going to do starting in utero, right? And we know about women and black women and higher maternal mortality and so forth. We have children in this country, millions of children, who go to schools in places where they don't even have the adequate school supplies, or not just school supplies, but resources to teach a child to read. And if a child cannot learn to read by the age of 10, the chances of high school graduation drastically decreased, and the chances of incarceration drastically increased. That's why they call it the cradle to prison pipeline. Now, speaking of prison, one of the things that I feel we need to do, and you can tell from everything I've said so far, We can't just continue to tweak things here and tweak things there. The undertow is just carrying us away. We need fundamental reform, and we need to take bold action. Americans are made to do great things. In fact, right now, we're all like wilted flowers because we're not being called to do great things. This country was born out of saying, the way it was, and now we're going to do it anymore. The abolitionists said, the way it was, that's not what we're going to do anymore. The women's suffragists said, that's the way it was, we're not going to do that anymore. The labor movement said, that's the way it was, we're not going to do that anymore. The civil rights movement, that's the way it was, we're not going to do that anymore. You can't tweak slavery.
No.
You can't do incremental change. Even when I heard Bernie Sanders today talking about the fact that President Biden, and I'm glad they're doing it, the rescue ships, the piers to take humanitarian aid into Rafah. So when Dana Bash on television, I saw this while I was getting dressed, said to Senator Sanders, do you like this? He said, it's a good step, but we need more. No. There's no more good next step. Stop killing them.
Right.
Stop. No. Enough of this. Just stop. You can't take, we've got to stop with it. We've got to wake up and go, no, we're going to make real change. And so I say that because one of the things I'm about to tell you now is a fundamental change, and it's time. We need to end America's war on drugs. Yes. And if you look at the story of America's war on drugs and how it has so exacerbated rather than healed the problem. So it was started in 1971. Some of us are old enough to remember Watergate. And some of Nixon's aides went to prison. And one of them was a man named John Ehrlichman. And John Ehrlichman was such a story of transformation. He went in as the sort of quintessential Nixonian crew-cut guy, and he came out so different. And when he came out of prison, he spilled the beans about everything. And to read the way he talked about the inception of the drug war is particularly interesting. What Nixon did was he called drugs America's enemy number one. And, Ehrlichman said he knew it wasn't America's public enemy number one at all at that time. And he said he started it. It was a political ploy. It was particularly intended as an attack on black neighborhoods. Right. Now, we have spent $1 trillion. It has clearly not solved the problem of drugs in the United States or drug addiction. Not only that, but when I was in college, which would be when that started, there were 300,000 people in prison in the United States. Today, there are 2.3 million. Right. And almost half of all of our federal prisoners are nonviolent drug offenders. Now, there's a deep racial element to that because black and white Americans take drugs on roughly the same rate, but you don't have police raiding white neighborhoods, right? Wow. To see if anybody's doing drugs here. We know that in any criminal charge, if convicted, a black person is liable to get, on average, 20% longer. So that's why not only do we have this huge population of black and brown people, but look how much of it is drug-related and how many of those people should be home raising their children, right? So one of the first things I would do, it's a no-brainer. You cancel the Willow Project, you deschedule marijuana, you let everybody who's in jail, in prison on a marijuana charge out, you expunge their records and so forth. But we need to actually move into decriminalization. I know that in Oregon, they went there, they did not do it wisely, it was not strategic, it did not include the accompanying harm reduction, et cetera, and so they're back to criminalization, but it was not done wisely or responsibly. All of these things I'm talking about tonight must be done wisely and responsibly. I'm not here to be a bomb thrower, I'm not here to be a chaos agent. So on the drug war, what you could do is, today we still spend $100 billion a year on it. You end the drug war, and for a fraction of that amount of money, we could fund a world-class network of drug recovery options. I don't want a drug czar. I want a recovery czar. The vast majority of addicts would like to be in recovery. We've got to stop criminalizing this. Gabor Mate said it's not a war on drugs, it's a war on drug addicts. So these are examples of the things, and this is also why I'm running for one term. Why am I running for one term? For two reasons. Because everything that I've talked to you about today is the kind of thing, if you want a president who goes in there and tries to make these things happen, I mean, obviously, a president does not have a magic wand, nor do we want our president to have a magic wand. A president is one of 3 co-equal branches of government, so it's not like, snap, we can make it happen. But to have the kind of intention to do it, I want it to be the kind of intention that you couldn't even have if you were even thinking about trying to get reelected. Number 2, I only want to run for 1 term because I don't think a baby boomer should be president in 2028. It's time to move this thing. The imbalance in leadership is not right. So at this point in America, I think it's time for a generation to rise up. For a generation to rise up, we must not just go along. And I feel, and you know, I do not think of myself as running against Joe Biden. I think of myself as running against the system, right? And I also know, you know, given what has happened, given how the system is operated, I'm at a point where the chances of my actually, they create what's called the delegate hole. So the delegates that the president has, the chances of my being president at this point are minuscule. Right. But with your vote, if I can get enough vote in these states that I could actually get delegates and be at the convention, then I promise you I will make noise and I will do everything possible to continue to speak these things, because I believe that it is our responsibility to be as inconvenient as possible to some people who really deserve and need to be inconvenienced. At this point, we're headed for the iceberg. And one major political party is just zooming right there. And the other major political party is moving there more slowly and would hit it at a different angle. I think we need to turn the ship around. If I were your president in those 4 years, I couldn't turn the ship around entirely. But I believe I could get us around the curve and then hand it over to another generation that can take it from there. As I said before, we were born to do great things. It's instinctive. When we are called to be noble, we are noble. But the political system does not call us to be noble now, because that's not how they think they'll get your vote. They don't think they'll get your vote if you care about other people. So they only want to talk to you about you. And even that is beginning to be flimsy, because we're at a point where if we don't care about everyone, then we're going down.
It's not going to work.
Now, some people say, Marianne, how could you be running? Don't you understand? Donald Trump is at the door. The fascists are at the door. I do understand. That's why I'm running. That's why I am running. And the fascists should never have gotten so close to the door. But if we do not offer people a genuine alternative to what the fascists are offering, if anybody thinks, if President Biden thinks that we're going to win, and that's really the strategy of the Democratic elite right now. You know how they're planning to win? They're planning to win by raising enough money to have enough TV ads. I mean, that was the article in Politico today. Hillary Clinton had more money than Trump. Just having more money is not going to do it. No. We need to meet his energy. We need to meet his energy, and where he presents to the American people a very fear-based vision of this country. We need to speak to the better angels of our nature. You know, when that term, better angels of our nature, when Abraham Lincoln said that, it was before Freud. I mean, in the old days, people had psyches, they had an inner life, but before modern psychology, when they spoke about angels and demons, it's no different than what we're talking about today. It's just the words and the conceptualization. Right. So what are the better angels of our nature? Love, justice, mercy, forgiveness. That's what we need to speak to. If a child is hungry, feed that child. If a person is struggling, help that person. If the earth is wounded, heal it. We can depend on love. And that's what Gandhi said. Gandhi said that there's a power in every man, woman, and child that will heal not only our personal relationships, but also our economic, social, and political relationships. And Martin Luther King went over to India and he studied the principles of nonviolence, and he brought them back for application to the civil rights movement in the 1960s. And he said that Gandhi was the first person in human history who took the ethic of love and turned it into a broad-scale social force for good. To me, policies should exist to help people thrive, not just to help a small group of us to get richer.
Right.
And that's wrong, that's immoral. And as late Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis said, you can have a large amounts of money concentrated in the hands of a very few, or you can have democracy. You know, I read a book once called The Gardens of Democracy, and he likened what's happened to this country like what would happen if you put all of the blood in your body in one arm. Opportunity has to circulate, money has to circulate. Right now, we have an ever-shrinking group of people who have easy access to healthcare, have easy access to education, easy access to just a life where you're not crippled by debt. So this is wrong. And more importantly than that is that it's unsustainable. So when you have a collapsed middle class like we have today, we need to remember that you can't have a thriving democracy where you don't have a thriving middle class. And when there were assaults in other generations to the very core of the democratic ideal, other generations stood up and they pushed them back. And yes, they looked at it and they went, it's all locked up. Surely the people who were trying to end slavery went, but it's all locked up. You know what they did? They unlocked it. To those women who were facing centuries of institutional suppression and lack of voice in this public sphere, sure, it was all locked up. They unlocked it. And that's what the labor movement did too. They looked at a situation that was all locked up. They unlocked it. And the same with the civil rights. And as I said to you before, it's our turn now. And I know it's somewhat traumatizing, but walking across the bridge at Selma was traumatizing too. We've all got to toughen up. Toughen up, Buttercup. Enough. We've become so enamored of our own pathologies and our own wounds. There are a lot of hours in the day. And those people who did great things in our past, they had wounds, they had fear, they had trauma. They might not have called it the names we called it. It was tough, but they did what needed to be done because they remembered that with this amazing ideal of American democracy and the Declaration of Independence on which they morally stood, that document gave them not only great rights, but great responsibilities. And I don't think we can feel good about ourselves. I don't think we can feel good about ourselves if we don't show up for this. You know, like people say sometimes, you know, it's so sad when a child never gets to have a childhood. I think there's something pathetic about adults who never get around to be adults.
Yeah.
And I think it's time for us to be a very adult generation. Let's not be the first one to wimp out on doing what it takes to put this country back on track. It will make us so happy, and it will save this democracy for our children. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.